More than a dozen people have been arrested so far in dueling left and right-wing protests in Portland. Police estimate more than 1,000 people showed up. We haven't seen too much violence, but did see a few fights break out. Like this, when a person getting off a bus of right-wing protesters got attacked. We saw one person on the bus with a hammer and a counter-protester swinging a hammer as well. We also saw an injured protester getting treated near the base of the Morrison Bridge. We don't know how they got hurt. The protest started in Waterfront Park, but groups broke off, disrupting traffic along downtown Portland streets, around the park, and on bridges crossing the river on the east side. Early on, officers were able to separate the two largest groups to ward off possible violence. There are a lot of different groups that showed up today, and we'll try to give you a complete picture as possible of what was happening. This all began around 10:30 this morning. Now, more than 6 hours later, most people have gone home. But as you can see from a live picture from Sky 8, there is still a group that is gathered in downtown. We have KGW team coverage tonight. We'll start with Christine Pitawanich, who tried to stick with the counter-protesters today, both Antifa and many others who said they just came out to oppose hate.
Joe, by and large, especially in the beginning, things were non-violent, at least where I was, but things are ramping up and have been since many of the other more right-wing protesters have left. We're here at Southwest Yamhill and Southwest Park, and Portland police have called the left-wing demonstration here a civil disturbance now and have told people they need to leave the area. But as you can see, they have not. And it was as things were winding down, like I said, that people seemed to start acting out more. In one instance, several left-wing protesters were caught on video attacking a bus full of right-wing protesters. One was even swinging a hammer. A protester on the bus had a hammer too. And after it looked like many of the right-wing protesters had left, a number of counter-protesters continued walking city streets, sometimes sitting, blocking the road in protest. We also saw a number of people recovering from getting pepper sprayed and saw Portland police arresting a couple people in downtown Portland. But before all that, Portland police were out in full force from the get-go, making sure the two sides were separated. We spoke with several people who showed up in opposition to the right-wing protest.
The people that are, signaling to stay out of violent situations are the people in all black. They know how to communicate with each other, and they know how to organize. And the people that are causing the violence are not the people in these organized Antifa groups.
That the message here will be misconstrued, that the vast majority of people that I've met are here for love, and to go against any other message that is trying to stir up strife, that we don't need the division.
Back out here live, while our crew has not seen any of the assaults as they've happened, videos have popped up on social media showing violence, but this protest not nearly as violent as some of the others that we've seen here in the city of Portland in the past. Joe?
Thanks, Christine. Now let's go to Tim Gordon, who is in downtown Portland. Tim, you follow along with those who planned the rally on the far right side of things.
Right, including a familiar face, Joey Gibson out of Vancouver, leader of Patriot Prayer, and a less familiar face, the organizer of the rally against Antifa, a guy named Joe Biggs out of Florida. They and their followers ended their rally a couple hours ago. Before noon today, a group of several hundred people from the right-wing side came across the Morrison Bridge and entered Tom McCall Waterfront Park. Inside the park, they were kept from Antifa by a lot of police.
No Trump, no KKK, no fascist USA.
There were a few verbal confrontations, but nothing major. It seemed members of the neo-fascist Proud Boys were charged with keeping the peace. A large part of the group then marched across the Hawthorne Bridge to the East Bank Esplanade. What's your point of coming to Portland today?
Just to bring awareness to Antifa. Look at it. We came in, we just did a march peacefully. We went in, planted our flag, came back out, and they're chasing us right now. I mean, it kind of shows you who's the thug and who isn't.
The big commotion here came when one man shared his dislike for the far-right group and was quickly surrounded. Police got him out. We also found Joey Gibson, who welcomed Biggs from Florida.
Every single city belongs to every single American, okay? Especially if it's a sanctuary city.
What's your plan for the rest of the afternoon?
Just follow the crowd. I'm not really doing anything. I'm just here for the ride.
But it was clear as we followed along that the crowd followed Gibson. As he walked downtown Portland, his critics found him and took him on as dozens of police followed. One woman drowned out Gibson with her motorcycle. When she wouldn't follow police orders to stop, they got her off the bike and into cuffs. Eventually, Gibson got into a Subaru and was driven away. As far as major clashes between the two sides, it seemed police employed a cat and mouse technique where they allowed the two groups to move, but never close to each other. Back to you.
Thanks, Tim. There were several dozen people who showed up at the start of the protest wearing costumes. This was organized by the group Pop Mob. They sang and danced and blew bubbles. There was a whole contingent of banana there as well. They say their goal was to be weirder and more absurd than ever before to distract from the right-wing protesters they say were bringing hate into the city. Portland police had a massive presence during today's protests. Chief Danielle Outlaw even said earlier this week that a majority of the officers would be working today, so they would be ready if the protests turned violent. We saw some scuffles break out, but in most cases, officers were there pretty quickly to break them up. Police made 13 arrests. We don't know what they were all for yet. They also seized weapons like you see here, including bear spray, shields, and these metal and wooden poles. During the demonstrations, the Bureau tweeted updates, including areas of downtown Portland where marchers were at. They closed down the Hawthorne Bridge except to let some from the far right leave the protest. Other streets were shut down as protesters blocked traffic. We expect to talk with Portland police in the next hour to get an update. We'll be streaming that online on KGW.com or on your KGW app. Before the protests got underway, President Trump weighed in on Twitter saying Portland is being watched very closely and saying he hopes Mayor Ted Wheeler will be able to properly do his job. Wheeler responded to that by saying this: he's not concerned about the president's tweets. President Trump also noted that consideration is being given to naming Antifa an organization of terror. Last month, a resolution to do that was introduced by Republicans in the U.S. Senate. At the time, Portland's Antifa group criticized the GOP of explicitly targeting political opposition.